Welcome to today's Exchange Wire Vox Pop. I'm joined today with a special guest, Dmitry Shishkin. Dmitry, welcome.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation. I'm Dmitry. I have been consulting tech companies and media companies to how to do content better for the last 2.5 years or so. But before that, I have been editor the whole of my whole life, but the editor who has always been interested in connection of product and content together and data on top of it. So a lot of years with the BBC, and also you and I obviously met at Culture Trip, where I was chief content officer, and where I learned a lot as well.
Great. Well, we're going to have a bit of a conversation today about your work in user needs in particular, and how we are defining audiences and how that's helping publishers go forward in terms of their content strategies and their monetization models. So to start with, tell me a little bit about the importance of user needs for publishers and in terms of content strategies.
Well, I think we need to start ourselves always with the question, why do we create content in the first place? What role does content play in people's lives? And without really appreciating what kind of things content satisfies in our audience's lives, then without knowing that, you always will be doing the wrong type of thing. And I think it's really, really important to ask yourself that question, where you operate in what type of niche you're operating, what kind of competitors you have, what kind of unique selling point you have against your competitors, because obviously we are dealing with several big trends at the same time. So people are super busy, people are super discerning, people really move from one product to another product without really thinking too much about the brands that are behind them. So our question is to understand the quality of your content and the focus of your content, because if I were to visualize how you need to operate, you need to operate on the intersection of two axes. One axis is focus, another one is quality. As long as you are on the intersection of those two things, you'll be okay. The problem is that a lot of content creators, a lot of content companies that do content, they don't understand what their focus should be, or even if they do understand what their focus should be, they don't really provide the highest possible quality. So because of that, you drift, and because of that, you can kind of become redundant. So that's how the concept of user needs in content came about. So when I was at the BBC about 5-6 years ago, we realized that audiences internationally were really not coming to the BBC anymore in the same numbers as we saw in, say, Notice or something like that. So we realized that obviously competitors caught up, some other players really have become stronger. So we decided to understand and ask people why they would come and consume news from the BBC. And somehow a now famous model of BBC user needs came about. And I was basically the one who started enforcing it in a really, really big way. I'm not a researcher. I'm a journalist, and my job was to basically help the BBC teams to employ that model, implement it, and basically kind of run with it. And we also have found out that as soon as you start appreciating the importance of user needs and every single piece of content doing something for your audience, then you suddenly realize how much overproduction you are involved with, how much waste there is. And this has been my job since then, really. I have been self-described evangelizer and enforcer of user needs model in publishing. Recent Oxford Reuters Institute for Study of Journalism has included user needs as a trend in the sector, which has been incredibly rewarding for me, because obviously when we started doing it, it was a little bit of a left field thing. But once you start thinking about this, people don't only consume news for, to get updated. They also want to get inspired. They also want to get diverted from hard news into something else. They also want to be educated or given perspective or kept on trend or all sorts of things. Like there are so many different things why people consume news. And for brands who are interested in content creation, they really need to appreciate their place in the market, that focus versus quality question. And then they need to understand, like, if we were to create content, what will this content do to people? And that's really paramount.
I think it's such an interesting intersection for you. Like you say, you've been an evangelist for this for years. And we are reaching a point in 2023 now that companies are really appreciating the definition their content needs. What we're seeing in people who are putting out content, it used to be a case of, the excitement. Oh, we can do this. We can do a blog. We can do a podcast. We can do video specials. We can do this, all this and that, and kind of every content outlet without really appreciating what their audience was for. And user needs models are really helping streamlining the process as well,
Well,
maximizing
you're
their
so right.
monetization.
Because initially we want to say, let's cover this topic. Everybody starts with topic, but the problem is that the second step, and that's a mistake, you always jump into formats. But actually what is really important is that between a topic and a format there is a user need, and that's you will say something like, our audience is really interested in business, but actually an educate me piece about business is 3 times more effective than an update me piece about business. And then you would start thinking, well, actually, an educate me piece about business told in a first person video is 5 times more effective than a business story created as an update me story as a text, for example. So once you start operating on within this wonderful triangle of topic on one hand, user needs on the other hand, and then also a format, you start basically interrogating those types of connections between those variables. If I were on the advertising side, I would be only interested in engagement. Once you start going into engagement, then you start talking about different cohorts of people, and you start talking about how can I actually sell to different groups of people within the same type of company. For the media organizations, it's an opportunity to come back to your advertisers and say, well, actually, you know what, we are offering you to advertise to buy out our business section, for example, because it brings you X, Y, and Z variables, which are 5 times stronger than for the website as a whole, for example, and then once you go into user needs and you say, well, actually, if you want to create a newsletter with an educate me background, for example, give me perspective background or inspire me background, doesn't really matter. You will say, well, actually, according to our website and according to our mobile site, whatever analytics, we can say that that type of audience is more engaging, shares more, spends more loyal, all of that type of stuff. And we need to become granular about this. That's why I never pay attention to websites metrics as a whole. I tend to always pay attention to individual sections of the website.
And I can see, we're seeing the return of context as being important. Like you've said, engagement is a metric that it's going to define the next couple of years. I think it's the most important. And user needs seems, this is something that publishers can really, really drill into. They can fully understand their audiences and can take that as a proposition to advertisers in a much better way than simply, put a display ad on our site. We have 25 million users a month. They can now, that doesn't work anymore. It's people are aware of the traffic they're buying. And I think it seems like user needs can really help publishers with their own proposition.
It's a very honest conversation. It's a very uncomfortable conversation sometimes, because you will then say, well, actually, you might have your own strategic direction or strategic I guess priorities, for example, but then you say, well, actually, let's be honest and let's figure out who are the most engaged audience that we have, and let's try to expand it one way or another, or at least let's try to spend our time, let's try and spend our effort in the areas where it matters the most. And I'll give you an example. Every time I do a content analysis of any type of content creation website, you probably always will have 5 or 6 actionable takeaways from that type of analysis. And you spend maybe 2 weeks doing that analysis, and then you kind of sit down everybody and explain to them what was happening. But the good thing is that whilst you are finding out some really interesting bits and pieces that can be changed, there are always like 5 or 6 obvious ones. Like, for example, educate me user need is the least used user need on the website, but the proportion of loyal visitors to those types of stories is the highest. It's those types of insights you will not be able to just see looking at your daily morning dashboard, for example. That's why everybody has been using dashboards for years now. Has it changed much? I don't think so. What really has changed is that once you go into the subscription model of monetization, you realize that people will only pay for content if it is valuable to them, if it does something to them. If it doesn't do anything to them, then they will move on to second publisher, third publisher, fourth publisher. And the same thing with niche publication, with B2B publications. Like if I were an owner or a CEO or a publisher of a B2B publication, I would jump at opportunity to identify my audience user needs, because then you will become much more effective in what you do, and you will be able to actually upsell people, create new products, because this is where connection between content and product becomes really, really important. And you would remember that from our culture trip days, where a travel funnel will be corresponding with specific user need, and we will be creating content in a particular type of way, which then our product people will turn into products that can then recirculate, and you can then kind of move the audience across the funnel, and so on and so forth. Ultimately, this is about why you exist in the market, how you're different, and how you can project the value. If you are still thinking about kind of, we have a lot of audience and we can just upsell it, it will end. That situation will end at some point of time, because the publishers will be asked very, very hard questions of by the advertisers, especially from the engagement perspective.
It's going to be a cautious year in terms of ad spend and where people are looking, and this is stuff like user needs models can really help publishers define what they offer and kind of bring publishers on board. I think another interesting part that we've discussed a little bit is in terms of a full business outlook and a full business structure that user needs. We're talking about it from a content angle and how we're defining our audiences and giving them what they need and when they need it. But also, I think in terms of goals, there's long been a structure where the product team will have something for a tech company, they will have a product and they will come to the marketing team and say, this is our product, sell this. And in fact, a user needs model can really help bring everyone onto the same page. Everyone's working towards the same thing. If you know who you're making it for and who you're going to sell it to, then it can really bring the business together. Do you think there is a use case there for kind of defining a company's goals?
It's a little bit like introducing OKRs within a company, right? Yep. Objectives and key results methodology is great because the whole company is subscribing to that, and then suddenly you have everybody pulling in exactly the same type of direction. So if you have on a C level of a company, if you have data person, product person, content person, sales person, marketing person, all agree on what they want to do and what the company is and what the company is not, then suddenly you cascade that information down, and then there are no surprises. You can motivate your staff from bottom to the top. Everybody will know exactly how they contribute to the business goal. So your kind of the health of your staff engagement will be much higher. You will be very transparent about that, and you also will be able to involve everybody to actually shape those OKRs and indeed the user need structure. I always tell publishers and editors in chief who I work with is that when somebody comes to a pitching session, don't entertain the idea further unless they talk through the lens of user need. Because then normally a conversation is, well, there is a story I want to write, but what type of user need is going to be? Is it going to be an educational piece? Is it going to be an inspirational piece? Because then you can go and sit down with your data people, social media people, and distribution people, and suddenly we'll say, well, actually, do you know that this particular type of pieces always generate the highest amount of engagement offsite, for example? And then that is a really nice feedback loop back to the editorial people, because you will say, these are insights that are helpful for your further commissioning as well. So it's a typical story life cycle, just revolves around user needs one way or another.
Timo, that was a really good conversation. Is there anything else you'd like to touch on?
If you're running a team of 20, for example, and one of your staff members resigns for one reason or the other, or you're sitting on a vacancy, just ask yourself whether you need a writing vacancy or whether you need to actually invest in tooling, or invest in audience research, or invest in maybe some product capacity. I can guarantee you that those types of additions to the team overall will have enhanced the capabilities of the other 19 people in the editorial team, rather than having a 20th person who will basically continue creating content, but overall the effectiveness will not be as high. So my plea to decision makers and budget holders is basically assess your end-to-end process and see where you don't have enough processing power, because another couple of stories a week will not make or break your organization, but actually people who will guide the bulk of the output in a much better way will definitely make a difference. And for me, this all goes back down to a triangle of product, content, and data. And inside that is obviously commercial needs and all of that type of stuff. But just assess everything together and don't rush into. And I'm an editor, right? I work with editors, and it's a controversial thing to say don't hire editors or writers all the time, but do hire them as long as everything else is covered as well.
It's a fascinating area, and I will, yeah, as always, be keeping a keen eye on your work over the coming year, Dima. Looking forward to seeing what you come up with, and hopefully we will meet again towards the end of the year. It'd be great to see you.
Thank you, John, and thank you for your interest in that. And if anyone who will have listened or watched this conversation, find me on LinkedIn. I'm very happy to have any type of conversation or answer any of your questions. It's a fascinating area and super important one.
Well, thank you so much for your time, and I will be in touch soon. Thank you, Dima.
Thank you, John.